Okay, everybody, on a count of 3, can we do it shares? Okay, when I say.
Get one. Get something.
Okay, so when I say, okay, 3, 2, 1, go. Cheers. What are you guys doing?
They're getting drinks.
They were a bit late.
Once more, okay? We're going to have a retake.
By the way, we are sort of pre-live.
What does that mean?
That people can already see and hear us.
Hi guys.
Hi.
We're making some Insta stories. Okay, again.
Cheers!
1, 2, 3, go.
Cheers!
Cheers.
Very good.
Meetup Munich style. Bavarian beer, as Basti likes to call it. Not just German beer, Bavarian beer. All right, so I thought about what I should talk about here today. And because this is a digital product school, I thought maybe what we should talk about is what you learn at school that is wrong. So welcome to the digital product school, and where we discuss the stuff you learn at school that is wrong. And I think that this may be the most important lesson you learn in product development, and then you find out in reality it's actually wrong. Okay, so a little bit about me. This is part of the Product Owner Success Toolkit set of workshops. You can contact me by email or Twitter. Everything works, so get in touch. And also, as you come up with questions, just ask the questions on the YouTube chat or here live, of course. Anytime, just ask a question. Okay, so there is this oldest and wrongest, perhaps, law of product development, and that is you shall not test your product idea before you develop the product. Some might even argue that you can't test it unless you have a product to test. Well, that's wrong. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, first, have you ever tested a product before you wrote even the first line of code? There's no one is raising their hands here. I don't know on YouTube if somebody's raising their hands. But I'm pretty sure that many of you have developed the product before you tested it. Here's the thing, every product includes thousands of assumptions about how the world works and what the customers want or expect. And of course, if we're not testing those, at least if we're not testing those deliberately, or at least some of those deliberately, we don't really know if we're developing the right product. Some may even say that, hey, we just asked the customers and they told us this was what they wanted. Well, that's even worse, because here's the thing. Customers never know what they want. They can always tell you what they don't want after you've developed it. But they can't actually tell you what they want. And the reason for that is very simple. You know, the customer's job is not to know what the solution looks like. That's your job as product developers. The customer's job is to know what is the problem that needs solved. And very often we forget this, right? Like a lot of times when we hear, oh, well, we've asked the customers, it's typically solution-centric surveys, right? Like, would this work? Would this work better than that? Instead of what's the problem you're trying to solve? As somebody said, some people attribute this quote to Steve Jobs, that it's not the customer's job to know what the solution looks like. That's our job, or in this case, your job. On the other hand, we also have to acknowledge that it's not our job to figure out what the problem is. The problem to be solved needs to be defined by the customer. And this division is very important. Here's why it is important. First, it reduces the possibility of you making horrible assumptions and very dangerous assumptions about what the solution should be. Right? Because if you don't understand the problem, you're going to make all kinds of other assumptions related to that, and then you're going to create something that the customer will say, well, that looks great, but it's not really what we want. And then the other aspect is, when we ask the customer what solution they want, they think of solutions. They think of the future. What would I like to do? But they're not the experts at creating products. In fact, if they are your customers, chances are they don't know how to develop products that you develop, because otherwise they would have developed the product themselves, right? And as we think about it, we start to see that actually what we really learn in school is that you have to have something to show the customer so that they tell you, is this the solution I want? But that's a very expensive way to check if the solution works. I mean, wouldn't it be much easier to do a paper prototype, show it to the customer and get feedback that, no, that doesn't work? Wouldn't it be much easier to have something like a walkthrough, a story map, show it to, okay, so here's how we think you're going to find your way to the stadium using carbon neutral public transportation. And they go like, no, I never do that. I always stop for a beer before I go to the stadium. So my starting point is the pub. And there's always a tram in front of the pub, at least if you're in Munich, because there's pubs everywhere and there's trams everywhere, right? So in fact, what we need to start to realize is that for us as product developers, the law that should stand is that you shall not develop a product before you test it. Now, this brings a few challenges for us as product developers. And one of those challenges is, how do you test a product you haven't developed? Let's review quickly some of the most important rules. Okay, so first rule, we've talked about it. I'm just going to reinforce it. You don't know what the customer wants, but you don't need to ask either. You can use a different approach. You can talk about tests. You can validate hypotheses. You can put scenarios in front of a customer and see how they react before you even wrote the first line of code. You don't know what solution will work for your customer, only they know that. But here's the thing, they can't tell you that in advance. They can only tell you after they see the solution. Because the customers don't know what they want, but they know very well what they don't want. And this tells you what kind of tests you must run. You must put the customer in a very specific, and some would say even extreme situation, so that they can tell you, this is not what I want. Very often when we develop some tests, and also definitely when we develop products, we try to make the product, some would call it easy to use, easy to adopt, easy to understand. Well, when you run tests, that's not really relevant. What's relevant is, what's the situation the customer is in? Right? Am I trying to communicate to my customer to my car with voice? Right? That would be one possible situation. What do I want to communicate with voice? I found out, at least with my experience, that my kids love to communicate to the car with voice to ask for songs on Spotify. But that's about it. Now, that's a cool feature. I will grant you that. But if I'm the guy buying the car, that's not why I would buy the car, right? So put your customer in that situation and ask them, what would you tell your customer with your car with voice, right? And they'll probably say, well, actually nothing. Boom, you now don't need to develop voice recognition for a car, right? Second rule is, they only know what they want after they try it. So they don't know what they want before they try it. Right? You have to put them in a situation. You have to understand how they react in that situation and try to make the situation as extreme as possible. Like really just, for example, only one way to interact with your product and see how they react. But here's something that the customers know in advance. And this is very important for us as we design experiments for product development. They always know what problem they are trying to solve. They may not be able to explain to you exactly how they solve it right now. In fact, that's one of the key skills we need to acquire when it comes to product development, which is to ask the right questions. but they always know what problem they're trying to solve. And in order to ask the customer the right type of questions, we use this tool. It's called the Single Most Important Question Survey, or SMIQ for short. And what we do in that survey is really 2 questions only. The most important question is regarding the context, whatever the context is. For example, regarding traveling to the stadium to watch the football match, what's your single biggest challenge, problem, or frustration right now? So, of course, as you can see, it would be awesome to go on a tram or a bus or a train with people that are going to watch the game and ask them that question, because then they are in the context, right? And if you ask them what they're struggling with, they will be able to tell you. They don't know what the solution look like, but here comes the second question. But they know what they have tried before. And this is incredibly powerful information for you when designing your product. Because if you know what the customers have tried before, you now know what you are competing with. You now know what are the alternatives they have selected to use in the past for the same problem, right? Let me clarify this a little bit more. There are some question rules when interviewing customers. You never ask about the future or preferences, because they don't know. They only know when it's in the past, right? So you always ask about the past. Things like, what did you do when you were in the same situation last time? For example, so last time when you went to watch the match, how did you decide how to travel to the stadium? Right? You can ask those questions. Those are valid. They call on the memory of that person. They don't call on the imagination or future preferences. And here's the thing, they don't know what they will do in the future. They only know what they did in the past. But you can also ask about feelings and experiences. For example, in the example of somebody that goes into the stadium, if you're going to the stadium by train, how do you feel about it? Like, you're in the train, you're talking to your mates that are going to the same match. How do you feel that experience? Right? Maybe they'll say they love it because there's noise and there's a lot of people and everybody's going to the game. Or maybe they'll say that they hate it because it's crowded and you can barely move and everybody's afraid of corona and so on. Right? So there's these options. But they know how to describe their feelings and experiences. And this is very important. So talking about feelings and experiences in the past is extremely important to understand what the customers are looking for, what they value. In the end, what we want to do as product developers is to learn to speak with the customer. Now, you don't always have a customer next to you. You don't always have somebody in front of you that you can ask a direct question. So here's a tool that you can use. You can use the empathy map. And what is empathy map? Empathy map is a collection of statements of understanding regarding the customer, right? We talk about what they think, what they see, what they hear, what they feel, and also what they say and what they do. And the bottom part of the empathy map is what are the pains, so what are the struggles they have, and then also what are the gains, what are they hoping to reach. And this empathy map literally helps you speak with the customer, because if you have the empathy map on the wall and you have a question, you think, okay, so by the way, the empathy map means that the customer has a face and they have a name, right? This empathy map here, the face is of a woman and it's Jennifer. That's an actual empathy map for a product that we've developed. So we talked to Jennifer. Right? So Jennifer, the last time you were trying to get selected to go into a conference, what did you do? And now we can go and say, oh, what do I say and do? Right? We can go to this area of the empathy map and actually figure out what they said from that survey. We collect all the answers from the SMIQ, or Single Most Important Question survey, and we put them here. One trick for the empathy map is always use the same phrases that they used when they answered the survey. Same words and the same like phraseology, the same way to put the words together. And over time, you get so used to this that you learn to speak and you're having conversations with your customer in your mind. Now, this doesn't substitute or replace experimentation. You still need to do that. But now it's a lot easier because you have the description of your customer in their own words in front of you at all times. And when you have this, so you have done the SMIQ, so the single most important question survey, you have done your empathy map, you now need to figure out, okay, so how do I test the product before I start writing code? So here's a simple example. You can write a book about the solution. Now, this will not work for all market niches, but for some market niches, it's very easy to just sell a book about the solution. You don't actually need the software, you just need to explain the solution you've come up with in the form of a book, with stories, with people that you've interviewed, you build their story and then you put it into a book. And the book will sell your product even before you develop it. Now, when you go outside and you talk to customers and you try to sell them the book, you're actually trying to sell them the software product you're developing or software and hardware product that you're developing. But they are buying the book. They are learning from the book how to do what you're going to automate into your software product, right? And because a book is something you literally sell, and also it is a product, this is something you are already using to test the basic assumptions of how to sell your product. What's the value, how to present it, what the solution looks like, etc. And this brings us to the third rule of product development that I want to present here today, is that sales is actually the ultimate product development activity. You guys that are here at DPS, you've heard me say that before in the growth hacking workshop, but it really is an important aspect for us as product developers to understand. Is if we're not selling the product, we're not actually testing the product. When you ask a customer, for example, something like, would you like to, they will want to say yes. Even if in reality they don't really care, they will want to say yes, because that's what people are. They are, they are friendly, they are amicable, they are agreeable, and they want to say yes when you ask questions like that. So instead of asking questions, we should be trying to sell the solution or the product. And here's another rule you can take. If you can't sell it, don't build it. This is very valuable. In fact, because a lot of products out there are not selling at all. And books are a great example. So I'll just give you the book example to illustrate this. The average book sells 250 copies in its entire lifetime. Entire lifetime. So if you can't sell 250 copies in the first month or the first year, then don't bother building the product, because that tells you that nobody really cares. Maybe it's the title of the book, maybe it's the cover, that could also be, but it's mostly that no one cares what you're trying to give them. There are books out there that sell millions of copies. So now you know. There is a clear number that tells you whether a solution proposal, or in this case a product, which is a book, is attractive to your customers or not. And that's 250 copies in the first few weeks or months of the book being live. So here are some ideas for product development in the digital age. First, ask the customer, yes, but not what they want, rather what they struggle with. This is why we do the SMIQ survey. This is why we build our empathy map. Second is use a product development method that is based on testing assumptions. This is a method we have productized for books. So we help authors sell books as if they were a product. So we apply product development strategies to book development. But of course, you could do that also with other things. And we've talked about some examples, which is one of them is in this third rule: sell your product before you build it. A clear example is just build a PDF or a paper version of what the product is. Many of the products out there are information products. They collect and share information in a way that is digestible. Create a paper version of that and try to sell it outside on the street. If nobody wants to buy a PDF information product for €1, they certainly won't buy a mobile app for 20, right? So that's a very concrete way to test the product idea. And that's the third rule, which is always sell your product before you build it. And the reason is simple. If you can't sell an early version of your product, like as a book or a PDF handout, it's unlikely that people will buy an actual software-based product or hardware and software-based product, which will be, orders of magnitude more expensive. So that was the talk for today. You can contact me with further questions, but we also have some time for questions. So if you guys have some questions, let's go through those.
I have one. I struggle a little bit with this 48-hour book method because I can see some implications, but in some cases I just can't make up what to put in this book. For example, like if we were about to build Spotify, like what would we put in that book?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the question was, if you were about to develop something like Spotify, how would you make that into a book product to validate the original idea of the product that was Spotify, right? So maybe Spotify is a bad example for what a product book would be, but there are other examples. For example, if you think about fitness apps are just automation of programs, right? And you know that in order to sell a fitness app, you first need to motivate people to actually follow that program. If you write a book about it, and a lot of people get interested in that book, then obviously you know that, okay, if I now just build the product, actually now I can even use the sales of the book to increase the sales of the software. And in fact, that was what many did early on. Like if you go back to the 80s and 90s, a lot of fitness and also diet programs were sold first as books, and then later on automated into apps that track your calories and so on and so forth. For Spotify, you would probably do something else. You would do a clickable dummy or a website-based product where you wouldn't have any music, but you would have some names and some album covers, and you would help people to see how they interact with the product. Because I don't know what triggered you guys to start using Spotify, right? Because at the time that Spotify came out, a lot of people had huge music collections. Actually, they had more music in their private collection than Spotify had in their whole collection. It's not like that anymore, but when Spotify came up, that was the case, right? I don't know what triggered you guys to start using Spotify, but there was something. And it's that something, that trigger, that you want to test, right? That's very important. Also, Spotify didn't try to go all over the world with their first product because a very big part of building Spotify as the product was to create the necessary musical publishing deals, right? So they went to a few markets where they had smaller niches that they could more easily negotiate the musical agreements with, or musical distribution agreements with. So I don't think that the book itself applies to all products, but it very easily applies to products that relate to collection and distribution of information, right? Good question.
Good answer.
I have one.
So shoot.
Did you ever come across an experiment where you found out during that experiment that, hey, okay, the product idea we were trying to validate through, I don't know, selling a PDF or a white paper or whatever, actually turns out to be a much bigger opportunity if we just made a book instead of the product?
Yeah, no, I have not, but that's easy for me to believe. I mean, so the question was, have you ever come across an experiment where by testing the idea that would lead to a software product, you actually figured out that a book would be a better product? But I have come up, and experiments are very good for this. I have come up, or I have experienced situations in which you are going in one direction with a particular experiment, and then you find that you're going in the totally wrong direction, but there's a better one if you just follow that. So one example from my own business, we publish a daily podcast. And when we started measuring the growth for that podcast, we found out that we were measuring the wrong metric. That everything we were trying to measure was actually irrelevant for us in our business. We needed a new metric. And of course, then we investigated and found out a completely different metric. While we were investigating that second metric, we figured out that there was a much easier way to achieve our goals than what we thought. Right? We thought that one key aspect of ranking and getting downloads as a podcast was to have good search results on Google, and we found out that actually that is helpful, but it's not really where most of the downloads come from. Most of the downloads came from people who subscribe to the podcast, pretty much like you all do on YouTube these days, right? You have those channels that you follow and you click subscribe and then you get the notifications when there's new videos. And that's how podcasts are downloaded. Even today, I mean, we still see that in the metrics, but we didn't know that. We thought that our goal was to create demand out there. And actually, in fact, what our goal should have been was to create loyalty within the community. And we figured out how to do that, and we got some good results. This is not exactly what you asked, but it's an example of how we started in one direction, and then the experiment told us, no, that's not the right direction. You should go in a totally different direction.
Thanks. You've got to go first.
How do you exactly define sell? Should there always be a transaction of money, or do you also accept lighter hurdles like in a mock-up that they click on, I buy or register for something, or is there always money involved?
That's a very good question. So the question was, what is the definition of buy? Do you always have to have a monetary transaction, or are there other ways to validate the intention? And the answer to that is, it doesn't need to be money, but the transaction needs to be something that costs to the buyer. And now the buyer here doesn't literally mean somebody who gets your product into their pocket, but it could be somebody that subscribes to a particular notification list. Because actually when people give their email, that has value, right? They're giving you something of value in exchange for a promise that you've made them. So one of the things we do with our customers is we encourage them to do what we call landing page tests. And landing page tests are literally just one button, of course with the marketing message around, but they are just one button to test what we are promising. Does it lead people to take action, right? And there's different ways, different levels of commitment. One is click here to be notified when the product is available. And in fact, if you look at Kickstarter, for example, Kickstarter is exactly that, except you pay to be notified when the product is available, right? You pre-buy, right? That's one example where there's money. But there are also other examples. You can put people on a waiting list, right? And then when the product's available, they'll get an email to buy the product. That's also a valid way, or a valid transaction in terms of validating intention to buy the product. You could also put a button that says, click here to book a call with us, right? For example, good landing pages are extremely efficient at acquiring customer interview subjects. If you have a good landing page, people will click here to have a call, then you set up a call with them, and they don't even know it, but you're actually going to have a customer interview with them, right?
Yeah. Obviously, when you have a certain hurdle people need to take or to make a commitment, and they do it, then you can be sure that you are onto something. But on the other hand, you can also validate something when you have no hurdle or low hurdle, because if nobody cares about your product, even though there's no commitment you're asking for, then you are for sure that your idea is cool.
And actually, this aspect, so any hurdle is let's call it an indication of commitment. Any hurdle, right? But there are very low-level hurdles, like for example, in an already existing product, you can test the value, the impact of a new feature. I was working with a travel agency online, and they wanted to check if searching specifically for direct flights would have a positive impact on their sales. And all they did was put a search direct flights only button on the page. And when people click that, they got a message saying that we don't actually have this feature available yet, but thank you for clicking. We'll consider your action as indication that we want to develop that feature, right? And that's a very low hurdle. But to Stefan's point, it's a very low hurdle, but it already tells you that there's enough or not people interested in the topic at all, right? And that's very important, because if nobody clicks that button, you do not want to write one line of code to deliver that feature. Unfortunately, these days, most product development organizations will first invest, an entire team or perhaps more to develop a feature, then put it out, and then not even check if it's used. Because if they were to check, they would figure out that the majority of the features they have in their product is actually not used. I just recently did an interview with a CTO for an analytics product, so they do analytics themselves, and when they looked at the analytics of their own product, they figured out that about 60% of the features are rarely or never used. These are all features that cost time and money, right? You have to have development teams working on it, testers testing it, support supporting it, back-end costs associated, whether you're storing in the cloud or bandwidth or whatever, there's always costs associated with delivering a feature. Yet these features deliver no value.
You've got salespeople talking to people about it and wasting their time.
You have salespeople talking to other people about it and wasting their time, salespeople time and the customer's time, by the way.
We've got some questions through YouTube.
Oh, excellent. YouTube sends questions.
Yes. So, Shu is asking, why can't a landing page work instead of a book?
Absolutely. So a book is an example of a product. Everyone knows what's in a book, right? It's an idea that somehow solves the problem that you are struggling with. So that's absolutely a valid test. In fact, the book itself can be the product that you're selling, but it can also be the way to introduce people to the product that you're going to develop, and therefore also sell that product that you're going to develop. But a landing page can be a valid alternative to a book. It can be even an early example of a book. And I'll give you a concrete example. This book that you see here on the screen, we never wrote the book. We created the landing page for it. And we checked if people wanted to know. We made a promise, so we knew who the customer was. Customer is Jennifer, by the way. That's the customer for the book. We knew who the customer was, we knew what the customer was trying to do, and now we wanted to know, is there enough of these customers out there for us to write the book? And guess what? There were enough customers. But we didn't know that when we started. So what we did, we got together. This is why the book is called the 48-hour book method. Myself and my co-author, we got together for a weekend, literally 48 hours. We met on Friday and he flew away on Sunday. And we wrote the first 3 chapters of the book and we named the other chapters. We only named the other chapters. We did not write them. And that was how we tested the idea of the book. Here's an example of using a landing page to test if it's worth it to write the book.
Shu has another question. Can you give some startup/product examples which were book first and product later?
Okay, so there's quite a lot, but the one that I love, and it's also on the podcast, if you go to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, there's one author there that I interviewed. It's called Ash Maurya. And Ash Maurya is famous for the Lean Canvas. The Lean Canvas is the outcome of a series of workshops that he was giving in the startup community in San Francisco or the Valley area. And of course, the Lean Canvas ended up being not only a workshop, which he was already selling, by the way. A workshop is also a valid way to deliver an information product as a way to test the validity of the product later on. But he created an app, Lean Canvas app. He created a set of services around what he calls, I believe it's Running Lean, I think is the book, if I remember correctly. And he started with a workshop, then developed a handout, then developed a series of services. He's also a consultant. He sells the Lean Canvas app and so on and so forth. So there's many ways in which we can do this. And And the key lesson from Ash Maurya's story is that it's an incremental commitment by the product developer. And it's every step of that incremental commitment is designed to generate validation for you to take the next step. Now, you don't necessarily know what the next step is because you don't know what the customers will do, how they react. But you can define a step that is lower than writing a whole piece of software, writing a whole application. One example that we give here at DPS in the growth hacking workshops is this idea of a concierge product. So let's say there's a lot of chatbots out there, like a lot of them. These days it's even, they're standard frameworks you can use to build chatbots. It's very easy. None of them
should be more chatbots.
No, thank you. But most chatbots are totally useless. In fact, the only reason I personally use chatbots is to figure out how to get to the button, get in touch with a human. Right? Okay, so here's the thing. Let's say you have an idea for an amazing chatbot, the best ever. It's going to replace the need for human support of first level, right? Second level and so on, you may still need it, but first level support, you're going to solve that problem with, incredible new algorithms, etc. How do you test it? Well, here's a simple thing. You put a person behind the chatbot, but you teach that person, maybe it's even you, what kind of answers they can give based on what you can build to create the chatbot. And now you test it in reality. You work 24/7, so you need to, have shifts, because chatbots that don't work 24/7, what the hell, right? But you have shifts, and now what you're doing is that you're using specific rules to mimic an automated chatbot so that you can validate that the rules you thought would be relevant are actually useful in the real world. And a human is, well, maybe even 1,000,000 times faster to train than a computer. Right? You can just write a few things in a Word document, give it to a person, walk through the Word document, and they're ready to go. Try to do that with a computer. It's going to take months of development, plus God knows how much of training before it's even ready to be tested. Right? Not working perfectly, just ready to be tested. So here, that's an example. The concierge product is a great example of how you can go straight to the market, learn a lot, and then from then on decide, do I want to really build the whole product?
Another question? Are you recording the session for later? Yes, we do.
It's on YouTube, so it's recorded.
So, and Benedict is asking, or not, actually it's a statement, maybe we can discuss this quickly. I would argue that the time spent by the customer reading through your white paper or book already counts as a commitment.
Absolutely. Like nobody will spend 5 minutes reading a white paper or a book if they don't think there's value in it. So obviously the cover matters, right? The promise you make on the landing page, the first headline matters. All of those are designed to validate specific assumptions. So if you read the fine print here on the book, it says how to go from experienced to expert in 48 hours. That's one promise. And get invited to keynote at conferences in your industry. That's the second promise, right? We're testing 2 promises with the cover. In fact, the second one, get invited to keynote at conferences in your industry, is actually the main promise in the landing page. If the people who go to that page are not interested in speaking at conferences and getting invited to be keynotes, then the book doesn't matter for them, right? They don't need to read the rest. And that's a test, right? If nobody signs up to get the first chapters of the book, then this is not going to work. Don't write the book.
But how do you measure when just the download? So I have so many white papers on my laptop and I never read them. So the first thing was I was interested in, but the problem seems not to be that big because I never got.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point. So what happens to the people who click download the book and never download the book? Is this a validation that the book is actually worth writing? That's a very good question. And the answer to that is very simple. You know that the average book gets 250 sales in its lifetime. If you put this out and you get more than that in the first few days or even a couple of weeks, then you're off to the races. This is a great indication, even if they don't read it, because how many of you have read all the books you've bought? I have a whole room full of books, and maybe I've read half of them, right? So that's a clear indication that there's value. And that's a very simple metric, like when you think about it from a book perspective, right? That's a very simple metric. But there are other metrics, like when I wrote my first book, the No Estimates book, about project management and software development, I just started talking about it on Twitter and created a landing page. And the first few months, we had already more than 1,000 subscribers to the mailing list. And if that happens, you know, okay, there's value here, because you don't get that many people to even find out about you and what you're doing if it's not interesting, right? And I mean interesting in the sense that helps someone solve a problem, which is what matters for us when we're building a product. So there's clear numbers when it comes to a book. Now, if you would say, how about a landing page? If I just have a landing page, well, depends on what you're trying to sell. I would encourage people to first do the book a call with me type of funnel, because then you can talk to people, you can do customer interviews, you can get much more qualitative insights into what people are looking for. And then only after that, go for the numbers. In fact, the SMIQ, which we talked about earlier, the SMIQ, the focus here is understanding, right? And understanding one specific thing, the problem the customer faces in the context you care about, right? So for example, when we asked Jennifer, this SMIQ had two steps. The first one was, regarding writing a book, what's your single most important challenge, problem, or frustration right now? And then from that first initial SMIQ, we figured out that actually writing the book was not what they wanted. What they wanted was something else. That's where the getting invited to keynote at conferences in your industry came from. Because that was really the problem for them, is they want to be recognized experts, but they don't know how to get there. And then, of course, from that we found out that actually writing the book is not the problem, but the discipline of writing the book is the problem. They have ideas, they just don't know how to put it into paper. And then we created a method, the 48-hour book method, that actually tells you step by step how you go from an idea to a book so that your customers help you write the book. And here's the key. This method, which we used for the 48-hour book method, is the same method we use for product development. You don't tell customers what they want, you listen to customers. They don't tell you what they want, they tell you what they struggle with. And that helps you to figure out what you need to provide to them. It also helps you to very much frame the experiments that you're going to run to get the validation from them.
Is Ed Even Rich a real person?
Yeah. We have a YouTube channel, by the way. You can search for the name on YouTube and you'll find we have, I think, 25 videos on the methods behind the 48-hour book method, which, by the way, it's called the 48-hour book method, but it's actually a product management method.
I have a question. So this is regarding a recommendation, what I would look for. So what I actually experimented was through LinkedIn, where I tried to reach a particular target group, which is for my problem space, plant managers. So what I did was I wrote a post on what we are currently solving and what we would look at in terms of user research to interact with them. So in about 2 days I monitored, I got about 200 impressions of the post. But I'm not really sure whether I gauge it as a commitment towards my solution, whether they really would like to go to the next step or whether they would like a demo of my product. So I was wondering, when you're looking at the landing page experiment, would that be a next subsequent step I can take so as to ensure that I have the commitment towards them, whether they would like to approach a solution like that?
So the question is, if 200 people read my article on LinkedIn, does that mean that the solution is a good to go, Or should I do something like a landing page test after that? Okay, so reading an article on LinkedIn or Medium or a thread on Twitter is never an indication of commitment. If you're a really good writer, it might be an indication of entertainment value, but of course that's another aspect. So what we encourage people to do is to always drive traffic to a specific page, right? So if I would to write a post on LinkedIn today, I would have one page I would want the people who read the link to go to. And that page is actually the top end or the front end of a SMIQ survey, single most important question survey. So typically what we do is you write an article, there's an opt-in, so there's they click something and they get this, okay, opt-in here. That might be because they will get a report or they will get stories from other companies, how they solve the same problem, that they will get a free consultation, whatever that is, something they value. And you already know they value that. The question is, do they value that in the context of what you're providing? And once that happens, once they opt in, they immediately get either an email or another page say, hey, we want to know more about you. And that's the single most important question. Because over time, to write this book, the first 3 chapters for this book, we wrote after collecting, I think it was like 120 answers to the SMIQ survey. Right? So first we went and got as many answers to the SMIQ survey as we could, not too many, just some. We usually advise around 50 or so. And then based on that, we created the empathy map. And then we created the book name and the landing page and so on. But that's what we would like to do. We want to focus on getting people into a SMIQ survey funnel, because that's what tells you what's next. Because when you write even a LinkedIn post, you're already writing about solution. When people read it, and even if they like it, it may be because they like the solution, it may be because they empathize with the problem, it may be because they are just curious, it may be because they're consultants and they want to take your idea and sell it to somebody else. Like, we don't know that, right? So we want to put that SMIQ survey so that we get a better, more qualitative understanding of what they are struggling with. And then at that point, then yeah, you could create like a landing page for a product that doesn't exist yet, or do a book to have a call with me, book to have a free consultation with me type of landing page, because then you want to test a few more detailed assumptions.
Thank you.
When you talk to stakeholders, you often hear things like, so regarding user research methods or usability testing or whatever. Yeah, our customers are B2B, and that's totally different from B2C, which is barely true. But when you talk about these methods, books, white paper downloads, etc., do you feel they are appropriate for both kinds of customers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I used to work with a client that sold products to ISPs, you know, Deutsche Telekom and Comcast and British Telecom, whatever, right? And there's only a few of those in the world. There's a few hundred of those in the world. There's not that many. And the way they sold the products was through white papers promoted on LinkedIn, so that people opted in, they gave their emails, and then they contacted them. That's how they sold their products. We're talking about, you know, millions of euro products. This is not like, you know, $20 mobile apps, right? These are large commitments that require integration projects and all of that, and that's how they sold it.
What was the white paper about?
The white paper was about a problem that the customer cared for.
How to get internet for free?
No, the customer, meaning the ISPs or internet service providers, cared for, and that was related to how to manage network security and all of that. And when you tackle that problem, they go like, shit, that's important for me. I wonder what these guys found out that I haven't tested yet. They download the white paper, and they are explicitly giving you permission to contact them about that solution.
Yeah. But did you gather evidence through your experiments that the white paper method is also or equally appropriate to B2C?
Absolutely. I mean, I'll give you an example. So when you think about B2C, you can think about, I want a new refrigerator. Maybe you don't want to write a white paper about choosing the right refrigerator. However, you could write a white paper about how to select home appliances to save on your electricity bill. How to select home appliances to save on or to reduce your CO2 emission, right? You can do that. And there you would be targeting consumers that are just looking for a refrigerator. But they are conscious of certain things and you want to target that specific population, so you build the product that way. You build a white paper in this case that way, that you tackle a problem they care about, and then you tell them, and this is how we do it. This is how we develop refrigerators at our company. We design the refrigerators, we find the best inverters in the market, we find the most efficient gases for refrigeration, just to reduce your electricity bill and your CO2 footprint. Right? This is a very old tradition. On TV, this is called infotainment. Right? It's entertainment that delivers information. And there's huge amounts of money all over the world invested exactly into that type of selling. What I'm telling you is you can invest that, perhaps not as much, but you can do infotainment products to validate the need to develop a much more expensive, but also potentially much more lucrative software or software plus hardware product later on. It really is about finding assumptions, validating those assumptions, and then moving on to develop the product only after you've validated those assumptions.
How much expertise is needed or required before you start those landing page tests? Like, do you need to be a total expert in the industry, completely newbie?
So how much experience do you need to have before you can do a landing page test?
Yeah, in that industry, for where you try to...
In a particular industry,
Yeah.
maybe something you've never done before. Okay, so what you need to know is, what is the answer to the SMIQ survey? What are people struggling with? Because remember that the landing page is a very simple promise. It's a promise to solve a problem that people already recognize they have. Now, if you don't know what problem people have, you can't make that promise. Doesn't matter how much you know about the industry. If you don't know the problem, you still can't make that promise, right? So I would say that the most important aspect is do the SMIQ survey, and this may not be easy. So for example, a rule of thumb we use is interview 3 to 5 people face-to-face using the SMIQ survey method, but face-to-face, so that you can ask follow-up questions. You can understand better the context. That already gives you a lot of information. Once you do that, you scale the SMIQ survey. What does that mean? You create that landing page, and then the survey is automated and so on. So at that time, you start collecting enough information about what the problem is. And if you do the second question of the SMIQ survey, which is what have you tried to solve that problem before, then you already know what they've tried. And now you have your unique selling point content, which is how does your solution differ from the stuff they are already trying and not happy with, right? So you don't need to be an expert in the industry. Now, obviously, to develop the product, you will need to become an expert in the industry, right? Because you can't solve a problem in a way that is acceptable and efficient for the people in that industry if you don't know what the industry is like, right? But to make that promise, you don't need that. And I mean, the biggest evidence of that is that there's a lot of marketing people selling products they don't know nothing about. If they had to be experts, they wouldn't be marketing people.
Thank you.
I mean, the USP of marketing people is that they're closer to the customer than to the experts, right?
Yeah.
So what does the potential customer know about the product?
Nothing. So you should formulate everything.
In fact, what we usually say, and I've said that already today, is that the customer knows what the problem is, but they don't know what the solution looks like. You know what the solution looks like, but you don't know what the problem is.
Benedict posted another statement in the chat, and I think he meant it to provoke a bit, right? So to
Thank you, Benedict.
Directed towards the measuring the commitment in getting something in return for the download or whatever. We said from the end user's perspective, most software products are free anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it could be, but don't forget that even if the product has no price tag, nothing is free for a customer. I mean, I don't know how many of you guys have noticed how many apps you have on your phone lately, but having an app on the phone doesn't mean you're going to use it ever, right? So if you're talking about product activation, you're not going to measure downloads. Downloads are useless in the mobile app ecosystem. But when you think about a book, it's not so useless anymore. So the context here matters. So yes, even if the app is free, right? So if you go to an app store and you download an app that is free plus advertising, right? There's a lot of games, for example, that follow that method. I've worked with gaming companies and they struggle to get people to use their products because if they don't use the product, if the customers don't use the products, they don't sell ads. If they don't sell ads, they don't make money. So yes, for the end consumer, they are not actually exchanging money to get the game, but they are exchanging time to get the game. So as an answer to Benedict, I would say that nothing is free. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Now, you may not actually give money away to get whatever you want, but you're giving something else, right? And that's a very important statement. There is no business that sustains on a non-transactional or non-financial transaction. It just doesn't mean that the final consumer is the one giving the money. It might be the advertiser. Or it might be that BMW or Spotify is sponsoring the app because they know that over time it brings customers to their ecosystem, right? That could also happen. But there is no such thing as a free lunch, right? You need to look at, okay, so what's the transaction happening? What's the value? So for example, for games, it's entertainment at least, if nothing else. So it's entertainment, maybe a feeling of community in some games at least. And that's the value that the customers get. But then what they're giving in return is a way for the game company to make money.
Obviously, I cannot read Benedict's mind, but maybe the question behind this is how do you measure commitment for something that should be for free anyway from the user's perspective?
Well, in games, there's a very clear measure of commitment. That's activation, right? You downloaded it, but that means nothing for a gaming company. For example, they measure daily active users or weekly active users or monthly active users. That's what they measure. So if you're not active, you're not interested.
So that's probably the thinking behind, or the problem they try to solve with that latest strategy of taking parts of the game and exposing it to potential users even before they download it by making playable ads.
Absolutely. That's one of the reasons why Google introduced do they call it instant apps or something like that?
Yeah, so
that you can play it in the ad.
Are there faster ways than to write a book or to produce a landing page?
Are there faster ways to test an hypothesis other than writing a book or producing a landing page?
Yes.
Talking to people. There's this big mantra in the Lean startup which is called get out of the building. Right? You don't test products inside your building. You test products outside. And they're very simple ways. Like one of the strategies we used for a B2B product, for example, was to inbuild experiments into sales conversations. Right? We were still developing the product. We were having business development negotiations with potential customers. And every one of those conversations included experiments. Right? The customer didn't know that, but we knew. And we were the ones that wanted to know the results, right? So there are faster ways, yeah.
But there's a question because we do also user interviews, but they are also really kind to us. They are, I mean, we do not know if they would buy our product outside of the realm of the interview. So we can value like if it's a usable or a good product, but we cannot test if they actually would buy it.
So that's a very good point. If we do a user interview, we can't really trust that they would buy it because they want to be nice to us. Yes, that's why you never ask them, would they buy it? You make them an offer. It costs 20 euros, you can take it home now if you give us the money. And if they don't buy it, whatever else they said, they're not interested.
Okay.
This is actually the experiment we did in today's DPS growth hacking workshop, right? We did the sales pitch experiment, and it literally means you make them an offer. And you could call this pre-sales or sales or whatever, but you make them an offer, right? You say, you can get it by the end of the DPS project, but you have to pay 500 euros now or 5,000 euros, depending on what the product is. And if they say no, then they're not going to buy it even after you build it.
Another way could be that so if that person is obviously interested in your product or excited about it or whatever, and you're some kind suspicious whether this is honest or not, you could ask this person to give you the contact details of another peer they think they might be interested in. And they will have a hard time doing it if they are not convinced about your product, because that's their reputation that's all of a sudden at risk.
That's a very good point, actually. Stefan just said that if you're talking to a customer for which the product might not be, the most appropriate, you can still ask them for a recommendation to somebody else they know that they would introduce you to, so that you would have an interview with them. If they don't do that, they don't care about your product. If they do that, it's still not sure, but at least you know that they are not completely neutral to your product.
Either that or they don't have any friends or people.
Yeah, or they hate everybody. Yeah, it's probably good practice to ask the next person you talk to if they like the one you talked to before, just to make sure that they're not enemies or something. That was a joke, by the way. That was a joke.
Or maybe they recommend you because they hate everybody, but then you're screwed. All right, so do we have more questions from YouTube? No, that's it. Any more questions here?
Yes, I would have a question to the single most important question. How do you narrow it down? Because you have for example, if the potential customer is someone who works at an office, do you ask okay, what is the most struggling thing you confront each day, or do you narrow it down to specific context?
Yeah, so how do you narrow down the SMIQ survey? So the format of the survey, or the first question of the survey, goes like this. Regarding X, where X is the context of your customer, what is your single most important question, most important struggle, frustration, or challenge right now? The X is what they are trying to achieve. That's not necessarily the problem they are trying to solve, but rather what they are trying to achieve. So for example, in the 48-hour book method, the first question we asked is, regarding finishing a book you've started, what's your single biggest challenge, frustration, or problem right now? But that assumes a very specific context. It assumes that you want to write the book, you actually have started it, but you didn't get it to the end line, right? So that's a very specific context. And we targeted that at consultants, because consultants benefit business-wise from having a book that is known, right? So there was a specific context for us. And that specific context comes in the DPS, it comes from, wouldn't it be great if, right? And that already gives you the direction of the context. Now you need to find people that care about that, wouldn't it be great question, and what kind of context they're in. So I was talking to a team at TPS that is doing software to improve performance of production lines, specific production lines, but production lines in manufacturing. So the context is there, right? So regarding reducing the waste, or reducing the cycle time of production, or reducing the wait times, or reducing the cost per part, right? You can ask that question. It's very specific. So regarding, for example, regarding reducing the cost per part in your manufacturing production line, what's your single biggest challenge, problem, or frustration right now? It's a very important context for the customer, right? So the context is the key here. You need to know what the context is. So when we came up with the avatar for Jennifer, we knew that she was a consultant working in a specific niche that benefited from having a book and had already thought that I want to write a book, but never published it or never wrote it to the end, right? So that was the context we decided. But that was us, because we're developing the product. We know what we want. We just don't know what the customer wants. So what we wanted was to write a book for consultants who wanted to write a book. So that's our context. But we don't know the solution because we don't know the problem that they struggle with yet. Of course, after we did the empathy map, then we started to understand that problem much further. And actually we figured out that it's not that they want to have a book to be well known, they want to have a book so that they get invited to keynote at conferences and are considered experts by the people in their industry.
Nice, thank you. Unfortunately, we don't have a bouquet of flowers to send.
I'll settle for a beer.
Okay, so then let's have a beer and let's end the YouTube stream just to not make people on the other side. And
All right, enjoy your evening, everybody.
thanks for joining.